I found a koan that I found challenging, so I wanted to share it with all of you. This is number 70 from Dogen's collection. It goes like this. Zen Master Wenyan of Mount Yunmen, so in other words, Zen Master Yunmen, asked Caoshan, "What is the practice of a śramaṇa?" Caoshan said, "Savoring the seedlings from the temple grounds." Yunmen said, "How is it when the seedlings are gone?" Caoshan said, "Do you raise livestock?" Yunmen said, "Yes, I do." Caoshan said, "How do you raise your livestock?" And Yunmen replied, "Wearing a robe and eating a meal. There is nothing difficult about it." To which Caoshan said, "Why didn't you say wearing fur and having horns?" Yunmen made a bow. So, context. Two monks, always two monks. And in this case, two monks from different temples. Right? They're coming together somewhere, somehow. We don't know. And Yunmen asks Caoshan, "What is the practice of a śramaṇa?" Now, a śramaṇa is a monk, but it's really a renunciate in any sense. We say that when the Buddha, before the Buddha became the Buddha, when he was Siddhartha, when he was out on the town and he saw someone who was old and he saw someone who was sick and he saw someone who had died, the fourth vision, the fourth encounter that he had was with a śramaṇa. It was an ascetic. It was someone who had given up worldly life to pursue a spiritual life as a renunciate. This was a whole thing. And Buddhism comes up, and Jainism comes up as well, kind of as a response to this movement, the Sramana movement, and it gives it a different shape. Buddhism in particular gives it a monastic shape, where everyone, all the Sramanas dress the same and they follow rules, and it has its own particular flavor. But by the time this conversation happens between Yunmen and Caoshan, Sramana means a monk. But we might also, because the word here is chosen, we might take it to mean something, it might imply a true one, a real one, a renunciate one. Right? What is the practice of a Sramana? And Caoshan says, it sounds very Zen-y. He says, savoring the seedlings from the temple grounds. Not much to say about that. It sounds really good, right? It's taking things as they are. It's even a positive spin on how things are. What's right in front of you? Being nourished by that. And then Yunmen asks, how is it when the seedlings are gone? And here the koan flips. Because Caoshan realizes, he wants to help, but he realizes Yunmen doesn't get what he's saying. And so Caoshan stops and he turns it on him. And he says, do you raise livestock? And Yunmen says, yes. And Caoshan says, how do you do that? How do you raise your livestock? And Yunmen gives another really Zen-y answer. He says, wearing a robe and eating a meal. There's nothing difficult about it. This line, what Yunmen says there, is why this koan stops me. And what I mean by that is that I read it and I think, oh, his answer is my answer. I more and more, for those of you who join us a lot, you hear me talking about acts of control, right? thinking about this question all the time. What do I think is within my control? What am I trying to manipulate? What am I trying to strategize about? What is the fantasy in this moment? Because it's almost always there, that involves some version of, if I say just the right thing, or do just the right thing, or think just the right thing, things will, whatever, they will be just right. Yunmen is concerned about this same question. And so when he's asked, how do you raise livestock? He says, I don't do anything. Livestock raises itself, right? I'm just sitting back, letting things be as they are. I'm trusting things to be as they are. I'm not getting stuck in that. He says, there's nothing difficult about it. And then Caoshan says, why didn't you say wearing fur and having horns? At which point, Yunmen gets that there's something lacking, or that there's something more here. And so when I read this, I have the same feeling of, oh, there's something more here. Because Yunmen, in this kind of laissez-faire version of practice, this very Taoist idea, right? You know, there's a great conversation that's been going on. It's maybe for years, but I hear it especially recently, around the relationship between Taoism and Zen, right? Some people even going so far as to say that the party line, which has always been that Zen is a kind of Taoism inflected Buddhism, misses the mark, and that in fact Zen is Buddhism inflected Taoism. That relationship is so strong, and we feel that, you know, and this conversation takes place in China. It takes place in that kind of mist. Yunmen is saying, I do it by not doing it, which is the classic Taoist idea. I accomplish by doing nothing. And Caoshan jumps in and he says, what about the identification with the act? Dogen writes about the 4 activities of bodhisattvas, the 4th being what's called identity action. It's identifying with what you are doing. It's understanding your identity as the action that you are taking now. And so he challenges this idea that raising livestock is the act of sitting back and watching cows from a distance. Then raising livestock is being livestock. It's identifying with the livestock. It's wearing fur and having horns. The challenge here, the question is, what do you do that you keep a distance from as you do it? I hear people all the time talking about how they're in a relationship. But what they mean is that they, as an individual, are in relationship to someone else. They don't mean they're in a relationship with someone else. That's different. It's different to identify with the relationship. To see yourself as part of something that goes beyond this normal conception of me, where the borders are different, where there are things you don't know. It is different to say, I'm in a relationship and then identify with the partner who is also in the relationship. To see yourself as the other person, to see the other person as you. There's a stark version of this, I think, a struggle that people have when they have children and they look in their children's faces and they can't figure out, am I separate from this? Or is it something else? What's going on? The work that you do you see yourself as that work? My guess is that if you love the work, if you want to identify with the work, then sometimes you see yourself maybe as the work. But we don't all want to be our work. And so we resist that idea. We step back and we say, that's not me, that's something I do. It's an activity, but it's not my identity. Even though in the moment I am doing it, there is no other way, at least by Dogen standards, there is no other way to define who I am than by this work. Because this work is what I'm doing now. When we walk, are we a being separate from the world, moving from point A to point B? Or are we this action? Are we the movement of our feet, and are we the ground where our feet step? We can say as much as we want, I'm not that. And whenever we do say, I'm not that, we're saying, I know what I am. I'm defined. And I'm confined to this. So I have the privilege of watching things unfold. I have the privilege of saying, the thing in front of me is not me. Dogen says, look more closely at that. Caoshan here says, you might want to think twice about the idea that you're accomplishing something from a distance. This particular example is so poignant because, of course, because after Yunmen says, he says it's not difficult at all raising livestock. But if we follow Caoshan's advice, if we wear fur, if we put on horns, maybe it is difficult raising livestock. Maybe that life is not as easy as the life in which we sit back and watch. Maybe there's pain in that we would rather not connect with. Maybe there are questions in that we would rather not ask. And so we apply this to the relationships that we're in. We apply this to the work that we do. We apply this to our many roles in the world. You are a citizen of some country. Do you understand yourself to be that country? Or do you see yourself as a piece that comes and goes, that moves within a larger container but is not that container? How do you understand that within your community, within your family, within your lineage? How do you understand that when you're walking through the mall at Christmas time and it's so crowded and you're walking like this, just trying not to bump into people because those people are separate from you, right? Because you imagine, as we all imagine, we can see it cinematically, right? Where everything is in black and white except you. You're in color and you're the part that's moving. You're the part that's navigating this world. I do this. It's not conscious. It's just felt. And so I have days, I have moments in that mall when for whatever reason I'm able to move with the crowd. I move through it and it moves around me. And what I tell myself is, this is me not doing anything. This is me not trying to control my situation. This is what it feels like to be at ease, which is part of this. It is part of this tradition. It is part of this practice. But Caoshan appears here and he says, that's good, but there's more. There's so much more. And it's always, 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 always right in front of you. Try that on. Whatever you're looking at, try it on. Whatever you're doing, try it on. Don't separate. Don't separate. Don't separate. And that's where I'll stop.